global economic growth has slowed, commodity prices remain depressed, and unemployment has increased in many parts of the world. Growth is considerably lower in our economy than we projected in February. This is in part a consequence of the global slowdown, but it also reflects our energy constraints and structural weaknesses in our own economy. In these challenging circumstances, honorable members, we have had to revise our revenue estimates down for the period ahead. The medium-term budget policy statement outlines the tough choices we have to make and challenges us to implement our national development plan with vigor. Over the past decade, there has been substantial progress in our social and economic transformation. Minister Hadebe recently released the latest development indicators, the report on development indicators. It shows, among others, that South Africa's life expectancy increased from 52 years in 2004 to 61 in 2014. Infant mortality dropped from 58 to 34 deaths per 1,000 live births between 2002 and 2014. Over this period, the number of households living in formal dwellings increased from approximately 8 million to 12.4 million. The share of households with basic access to electricity increased from 77% to 86%. Access to water increased from 80% to 86%, and access to sanitation increased from 62% to 79%. The proportion of 5-year-old children attending early childhood development facilities has more than doubled to 87%, and adult literacy has increased to 84%. These development indicators also signal several important long-term trends in our social and economic structure, ranging from movement of people from rural areas and small towns to cities and associated changes in lifestyle and living standards. The rising use of public transport and urban amenities, increasing demand for education use of social media and access to the internet. The growing importance of service industries and tourism, and the growth of our economic links with Africa and the global economy. In reflecting on our transformation challenges, honorable members, it is clear that a new growth path is needed if we are to unleash the development potential of these structural trends. Building houses, honorable members, is not enough. We have to reshape our cities to create integrated and productive living environments. Our education and training capacity is not enough. We have to invest in quality improvements and meet new skills requirements. Our levels of investment are also not enough. We have to modernize technology and compete effectively in the global economy. Our present retirement and insurance arrangements are not enough. We need a more comprehensive approach to social security. And we also know that growth is not enough. Investment in health, nutrition, and basic living conditions are key contributors to poverty reduction, social mobility, and lower inequality. These are large themes, honorable members, and I should refrain from trespassing on territories that are supervised otherwise by my fellow colleagues in Cabinet. But my point is that the proposals in our medium-term budget policy projections are only the more quantifiable instruments of our transformation. They are deeper and more profound currents. It is in the quality of our services and the integrity of our engagements that we have the most powerful levers of social change. Quality and integrity cannot be assured, as we know, by laws or ideological precepts, by sanctions or emotional appeals, as we have seen in the House. They derive from dedication, commitment, and shared values. I have in mind here, Honorable Speaker, the two Pakisa consultative laboratories currently underway or about to begin. One is focused on basic schooling and the other on the mining sector. One is looking at the role of technology in the classroom and the other at modernizing industrial methods and systems. But the important conversations in these laboratories are not about computer programs or mechanical tools. They are about our children, and how we value their future. They are about men and women who work in arduous conditions, on whose productivity we all rely. The important conversations are about commitments, as I've said, and interdependence, about our trust in an inclusive social contract to make the future better. When times are tough, as they are now, it is that much more important that we strengthen the partnerships that put our children first, partnerships that signal our commitment to decent work, that open up participation in our economy, and that broaden access to land, skills, finance, and development opportunities. If we do not achieve growth, revenue will not increase, and if revenue does not increase, expenditure cannot be expanded. Mr. President, you have called on your cabinet to review and give impetus to our growth strategy in government, in business, in unions, and in civic formations. All of us have a part to play in building a more prosperous and sustainable future. The MTBS projection is that the South African economy will grow at about 1.5% this year, rising marginally to 1.7% next year. 1.7% next year. This is considerably lower than at the time of the February budget, when we envisaged a 2% this year and 2.4% in 2016. The IMF has also projected a decline in growth next year, and perhaps that's where the 1.3 comes from. Electricity supply constraints, falling commodity prices, and lower confidence levels have resulted in our growth forecasts being revised lower. Investment growth will be just 1.2% this year. Limited employment growth and household income constraints are holding back consumption. Exports have grown strongly this year, which is a welcome recovery after setbacks in mining and manufacturing last year. Although exports have grown faster than imports since 2012, the current account deficit on the balance of payments is still a sizable 4.1% of GDP this year. Consumer price inflation has declined from 6.1% in 2014 to a projected 4.8% this year. Higher food prices and the weakening of the rand are expected to contribute to a rebound in inflation to around 6% a year over the period ahead. Financial market volatility is high, and capital inflows into emerging markets have slowed. This has raised borrowing rates for emerging markets globally. Though there is still a long way to go in building energy security, we are now benefiting from Eskom's enhanced maintenance efforts and our expanding renewable energy programs. The first unit of Medupi also came online, adding 800 megawatts of capacity to the grid. The Minister of Energy has invited proposals for independent coal and gas power projects. The National Treasury is working also with the Department of Energy to assess proposals and financing options for building additional nuclear power capacity. Rail capacity continues to expand alongside road, water, and telecommunication networks. Increased investment in broadband was one of the main reasons for South Africa's improved ranking in the Global Competitiveness Report to 49th place out of 140 countries. Amicable settlements have been reached this year in the coal and private security industries and for the majority of gold workers. The CCMA has become increasingly proactive in settling labor disputes thanks to the changes in the Labor Relations Act. NEDLAC is working on practical ways to avoid protracted and disruptive strikes, whilst also considering proposals at a national minimum wage. Our employment tax incentive for young work seekers continues to attract broad participation. Total claims for the incentive have amounted to 3.9 billion rands since the start of the program, up to the end of July 2015. It has been claimed by over 36,000 employers for over 250,000 workers. There has been active debate around its impact, and the ETI will be carefully assessed in due course, recognizing that all programs and incentives should be evidence-based and continuously evaluated. This will complement research by the Davis Tax Committee on the role of incentives in the corporate tax system. Honorable members, bold action is needed. Restoring the momentum of growth requires policy certainty, confidence and trust shared between government, business, workers, and households. Honorable Chairperson, strengthening our engagement with Africa and the wider Southern African region is a critical element in our growth and development strategy. Regional integration means practical collaboration in building infrastructure, investment promotion, and growing trade linkages. In order to fast-track key projects, we have introduced a project preparation and development facility for the SADC, managed by the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Feasibility studies have recently been approved for a project to improve South Africa and Zimbabwe's access to Mozambique's hydropower capacity, and a major rail project to link Zambia, Angola, and the DRC. South Africa continues to use its membership of the G20 to support international cooperation in lifting growth and reducing global inequality. We welcome the detailed and wide-ranging commitments made by the global community in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for the next 15 years and the related agreement on financing for development. Also to be welcomed is the package of measures that has been agreed to this year to counter corporate profit shifting and base erosion. South Africa has already committed to automatic exchange of financial information for tax purposes. The first exchange took place last month. Over 90 countries, including low-tax jurisdictions, have committed to exchanging information by 2018. Soon, tax evasion and aggressive tax planning will have nowhere to hide. In July this year, agreement between Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa to establish a new development bank reached fruition. We will shortly respond to the NDB's opening invitation for project proposals. A special appropriation will be tabled this year to provide for the first tranche of our capital commitment to the new development bank. This 2 billion rands investment will be covered by the proceeds from the sale of government's stake in Vodacom. Honorable Chairperson, I've already indicated that our revenue estimates are adjusted down in this medium-term budget policy statement as a result of the slowdown in economic activity. Gross tax revenue is revised down by 7.6 billion rands this year and by 35 billion rands over the 3-year period. Revenue has nonetheless held up well since the 2008-9 recession. This signals both the resilience of our tax policy framework and continued strength of tax administration. Fellow South Africans, tax compliance lies at the heart of nation building and social cohesion. Without a buoyant revenue base, a nation cannot develop and succeed. Allow me, therefore, to express my appreciation to all those, whether in revenue services or on the other side of this social contract, who ensure that taxes are paid in full and on time. Over the medium term, we will continue to explore reforms that promote an efficient and progressive tax system. Recommendations of the Davis Tax Committee, already under consideration, cover, among other things, 1, profit shifting and the misuse of transfer pricing, 2, mining taxation, 3, small business taxation, and VAT and the estate duty. I've asked for further advice on wealth taxes from the Davis Tax Committee. The committee has published an instructive report on the role of the tax system in supporting inclusive growth, employment, equity, and fiscal sustainability. Allow me now to urge all stakeholders to take the opportunity to comment on these reports so that the final recommendations are well informed and thoroughly debated. There will be a further opportunity to debate the proposed design of a carbon tax when the draft bill is published for comment later this month. This forms part of a package of measures which Minister Molewa will be taking to the United Nations Climate Change Conference later this year. This package is intended to ensure that South Africa makes a fair contribution to global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Honorable members, our central fiscal objective over the period ahead is to stabilize debt as a share of GDP. In the immediate aftermath of the 2008 recession, the budget deficit widened sharply to support our economic recovery. The deficit has since narrowed and is expected to be 3.8% of GDP this year, falling to 3% over the medium term. Following the recession, government debt increased from around 26% of GDP to 47% in March this year. Our projection is that the debt will rise by a further 600 billion rands over the next 3 years, while stabilizing as a percentage of GDP. In support of our long-term fiscal framework, the MTBPS proposes a fiscal guideline for the expenditure ceiling in the outer year of the fiscal framework. The proposal is that the spending ceiling should be linked to South Africa's long-term economic growth projections. Over the long term, this guideline maintains spending as a stable share of national income. A structural change in expenditure would have to be accompanied by corresponding revenue measures. Without economic growth, ladies and gentlemen and honorable members, revenue will not increase. And without revenue growth, expenditure cannot increase. As we have done since 2012, honorable members, the overall expenditure limit in the MTEF remains in place. If further steps are needed to protect the public finances, we will take them. We are staying the course. The main change in the fiscal framework by comparison with the February budget arises from this year's settlement of salary adjustments and benefits of public servants. The agreement provides for additional costs of 10.1% this year and improvements that will be at least 2 percentage points higher than consumer inflation in the next 2 years. The shortfall in compensation budgets is accommodated in the expenditure framework, largely by drawing down on the contingency reserve. Nonetheless, departments will need to reallocate spending from other priorities. For the period ahead, the improvement in compensation means that there is no room for expanding government employment. This is not a sustainable situation. We therefore recognize the need to improve the negotiations process and to reform public sector remuneration. Work is also underway to develop better approaches to capital project appraisal and the financing of major infrastructure investments, either as departmental initiatives or where these are undertaken by state-owned companies, municipalities, or independent investors. Well-informed selection of projects is a key step in enhancing the productivity of infrastructure services. The introduction of socio-economic impact assessment will also assist in improving coordination of government's policy choices and identifying unintended consequences earlier in the process of developing regulations and legislation. In moderating the budget deficit and stabilizing government debt, we are mindful that Eskom, Transnet, and several other state-owned companies have large borrowing requirements. Infrastructure investments by our cities, larger municipalities and water utilities also requires access to the capital markets. Honorable members, financing of state-owned companies that are responsible for growth-enhancing infrastructure investment is one thing, but relief for entities that should be self-sustaining or that have mismanaged their commercial activities is quite another. This remains a serious risk to the medium-term fiscal outlook. Work has therefore begun on a legislative framework to regulate state-owned companies and to address their governance challenges. The main budget is the largest part of the consolidated fiscal framework over the MTEF. National departments are allocated around 47.5% of the main budget, with provinces just over 43%, municipalities coming in at 9%, and as we know, provinces account for 70% of all public service employees. They therefore have to make substantial adjustments to accommodate the increased cost of the wage agreement. To assist with adjustments, 3.8 billion rands is added to the provincial equitable share this year and a further 49 billion rands over the medium-term expenditure framework. However, this will not fully fund the shortfalls. Provinces will still have to seek further cost efficiencies in order to maintain service levels. Provinces have already taken steps to contain costs. Personnel numbers have declined by about 2% since 2012, including a reduction of over 10,000 since the start of this financial year. Provinces' spending on non-essential goods and services like advertising, travel, and consultants continue their downward trend. Our initiatives to improve government efficiency are bearing fruit. Health departments, for example, have improved supply chain management procedures to reduce wastage in medicines and laboratory costs. In addition, a number of provincial public entities have been rationalized to reduce duplication of work. Budget allocations to municipalities continue to prioritize the rollout of basic services to historically disadvantaged areas. This has led to millions more households having clean water, a safe toilet, and lights to switch on in the evening. However, these services have come under stress in some areas because of poor maintenance or weak operations. While continuing to extend services where they are not provided, attention has to be given to the reliability and functionality of municipal infrastructure services. Allocations to local government continue to grow faster than the national and provincial shares. This reflects the priority placed on the basic service delivery by municipalities. Over the 2016 MTEF, allocations to municipalities amount to 351 billion rands, growing at an average of 8.2% a year. This includes provision of free basic services, eradication of infrastructure backlogs, and institutional capacity building. National Treasury has led a review of municipal infrastructure funding arrangements with a view to promote better management and maintenance of assets. Reforms to be implemented in the 2016 include rationalizing grants to reduce unnecessary administrative overlaps and improving responsiveness to social and economic needs of our citizens. The development needs of our cities remain that we must not just rely on, they demand that we do not just rely on government funds, but also bring the private sector on board. In August this year, Minister Gordon and myself hosted an urban investment partnership conference that brought together cities and private investors to explore options to create municipal infrastructure investment. In support of this, the Development Bank of Southern Africa is expanding its longer-term financing of infrastructure. We have a clear responsibility to ensure that the fragmented, racially segregated cities we inherited become dynamic, integrated sites of enterprise and improved living conditions for all. Honorable President, the key priorities of your administration remain at the center of our medium-term expenditure plans. Education and skills development account for the largest share of spending. Health services, social protection, infrastructure investment, and support for job creation are also prioritized. Government spending is set to grow at 7.2% a year over the medium term, remaining above inflation. The allocations we are proposing today are guided by the 2014 to 2019 medium-term strategic framework and its 14 outcomes. Government proposes to allocate 313 billion rands to capital spending and housing over the MTEF period, with around 165 billion rands allocated for community infrastructure. Another 229 billion rands will be transferred to municipalities for infrastructure projects. Our social assistance grant program is central to the relief of poverty and vulnerability. Approximately 16.7 million South Africans receive social grants currently. With effect from this month, the old age and war veterans and disability and care dependency grants are increased by 10 rands to bring the annual increase in line with the long-term inflation. Over the 3-year period ahead, nearly 13 billion rands will be added to social assistance budgets. Additions, continue, members. Thank you. Additions to health expenditure will further strengthen our response to HIV and AIDS and scale up interventions to address TB. Health budgets are set to grow by 8.3% from 2015-16 through to 2018-19. New resources will also be allocated to improve primary health care. Under Minister Motsoaledi's guidance, national health insurance will also be phased in, drawing on the lessons of the district pilot projects. To enhance basic education, Provision of learner and teacher support materials is prioritized over the period ahead, including workbooks to over 10 million learners each year. Basic education allocations over the medium-term expenditure framework increased by 8.2% a year. Funds are allocated to enable early childhood development programs and to enroll a further 127,000 learners. Honourable members, we have been reminded this past week of the challenges of financing the expansion of further education and university opportunities. It needs to be said that disruption of learning is not constructive, neither is disruption of parliament. But Minister Nzimande has rightly indicated the need to strengthen student financing further and to find solutions where current arrangements are inadequate. And government is seized with this matter. Allocations to public employment programs over the next 3 years amount to 37 billion. This will allow the expanded public works programs to create about 6 million short-term jobs. By 2017, the community works program will exist in every municipality. Support for enterprise development over the period ahead includes 24 billion rands in tax incentives and 16 billion rands in direct funding to support industrialization. These initiatives include the Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program and the Automotive Production and Development Program. Special economic zones will also receive continued funding, including new zones in Free State and Gauteng. A review is proposed to assess the impact of fiscal incentives on economic growth, productivity, competitiveness, the balance of trade and employment. Over the next 3 years, the South African Police will strengthen the public order policing capabilities and address training gaps, including those identified by the Marikana Commission of Inquiry. The South African Human Rights Commission, the Public Protector, and the Office of the Chief Justice receives additional allocations over the MTF to address capacity challenges. Substantial additional allocations are also proposed for national and provincial roads over the period ahead. This includes a fiscal contribution for the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project to compensate for the reduced user charge dispensation, half of which will be recovered from the province of Gauteng. Over the period ahead, there will be a strong focus on building partnerships with the private sector to boost inclusive growth and job creation in South Africa's cities. Government will continue to support municipal planning and implementation of urban development projects to catalyze spatial change. These include the Columbia and Warwick Junction projects in eThekwini, the sleeper site development in Buffalo City, and the redevelopment of Athlone Power Station in Cape Town. A revised capacity building initiative aligned to the Back to Basics strategy will be targeted at municipalities in 27 priority rural districts. And grants to rural areas continue to support municipalities to eradicate backlogs in access to services, increase mobility, and create opportunities to grow local economies. This medium-term expenditure framework will provide assistance to municipalities that will be merged after the 2016 local government elections for the administrative costs involved. Now, let me take this opportunity to remind councillors and officials that we expect financially responsible budgeting and expenditure management during the run-up to the elections. Guidance in this regard will be issued by the National Treasury. In all of these initiatives, honourable members, the quality and integrity of governance are critical elements in achieving the outcomes we seek. As this year's winner of the Nobel Prize for Economics, Professor Angus Deaton puts it, and I quote him, "The absence of the state capacity, that is, of the services and protections that people in rich countries take for granted, is one of the major causes of poverty and inequality around the world. Without effective states working with active and involved citizens, there is little chance for the growth that is needed to abolish global poverty," close quote. Honourable Speaker, alongside the medium-term budget policy statement, I'm tabling the adjustments appropriation for 2015-16 today. The salary adjustments of 1.2 billion rands for the national departments and 3.8 billion rands for the provinces is the main revision of the expenditure estimates for this year. Other significant adjustments are as follows. 720 million rands for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation to compensate for the depreciation of the rand. 1.2 billion rands in spending financed out of monies paid into the National Revenue Fund from departmental activities. 1.6 billion rand in rollovers from unspent balances in 2014-15, including delayed payments to municipalities with unresolved utility arrears. 1.1 billion rands in additional transfers of skills levy revenue to sector education and training authorities and the National Skills Fund. Further details are provided in the adjusted estimates of national expenditure. Two substantial allocations that were not provided for in this main budget in February are dealt with in the special appropriations. The first is the 23 billion rands allocation to Eskom, which has already been enacted by this House, and the second is the 2 billion rands allocation for the new development bank. These have been financed through the sale of government shareholding in Vodacom, as I've indicated. After taking into account revised revenue estimates, the expenditure adjustments and projected savings, the main budget deficit for 2015-16 is 176.3 billion rands. And when taking into account the balance of social security funds, public entities and provinces, the projected consolidated budget deficit is 3.8% of GDP, which is slightly less than the February estimate. In the February budget speech, I emphasized the urgent need for improved efficiencies and effectiveness in public procurement. I indicated that modernization of supply chain management would target better use of technology, and since then, much has been achieved. Government's e-tender portal has already been established, providing a single point of entry to business opportunities with government. This enhances transparency and reduces the time and cost of accessing tender documents. The second one is that a central supplier database is now operational, easing the administrative burden for business and government alike. More than 20,000 suppliers have already registered, and a total of 9,500 have been verified since the 1st of September 2015. I urge all suppliers to register before the 31st of March. The database provides information on commodity prices by locality, right down to municipal ward level. The transversal contract for learner-teacher support material has been completed. The highest contract price is for stationery at grade R, which is 115 rands per learner, inclusive of packaging and delivery. And the cost of other grades is below 100 rands. And we've worked with Minister Motshekga to reduce this to this level. This month, we launched a buying site for high-volume, low-value items, which is similar in design to commercial e-commerce sites. Supply chain management practitioners can now purchase routine items through the web at www.gcommerce.gov.za. A consolidated procurement bill is being developed to rationalize the more than 80 legal instruments, guidelines, and instruction notes that currently apply. A framework has also been developed to standardize public procurement reporting, supported by a training program for responsible officials. Further enhancements that support SMMEs in the area of electronic bids, quotations, and technologies will also be implemented in 2016-17. Tender documents will be made user-friendly and easy to comprehend. The number of documents needed for a tender will be reduced, and they will be customized to reflect the diversity of procurement processes. For instance, buying a filing cabinet is different from hiring an advisor or building a school. Public procurement, honorable members, is big business. The South African public sector spends over 500 billion rands a year on the procurement of goods and services. Making better use of technology is therefore important, but it is not enough. Reform of supply chain management will remain a central priority to generate short and medium-term savings, but more importantly, to bring value for money and to combat corruption. In December 2013, the National Treasury issued an instruction on cost containment measures relating to consultants, travel and subsistence, entertainment, catering and events.